"You're useless," my daughter screamed before cutting ties with me for 8 years. When my wife's $23 million inheritance was released, she showed up at my door with a cake. "Daddy, I brought this for our reconciliation." I noticed something strange in the cake and then... Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Aaron and I'm 59 years old. Most days I wake up to silence so thick it feels like it might crush me. But 8 years ago the silence was different. 8 years ago it was broken by 3 words that still echo in my mind every single morning. "You are useless." Those words came from my daughter Clare. She was 27 then, standing in the doorway of what used to be our family kitchen, her face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before. Her mother Martha had been gone for 6 months, and I guess Clare had finally reached her breaking point with me. I can still see her that day. She was wearing Martha's old blue sweater, the one with the small hole near the left elbow that Martha never bothered to fix. Clare had been wearing it a lot since the funeral, like she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away from all of us. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that made her look older than her years. "Dad, are you even listening to me?" she had asked, but her voice already carried that edge of frustration that meant she'd been talking for a while. I wasn't listening. I couldn't. In those days after Martha's death, everything sounded like it was coming from underwater. The grief counselor had warned me about this, said it was normal, but normal didn't make it any easier to function. I spent most of my time sitting in Martha's reading chair, staring out the window at the garden she'd loved so much, watching her roses slowly die because I couldn't bring myself to water them. "I lost my job," I had mumbled, not looking at Clare directly. It was true. The marketing firm where I'd worked for 15 years had let me go after I'd missed too many days. I couldn't explain to them that some mornings getting dressed felt impossible. How do you tell your boss that you sometimes forgot how to breathe? Clare's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Of course you did. You can't even take care of yourself, let alone hold down a job." That's when I looked up at her, really looked. She was crying, but not the soft tears I remembered from her childhood. These were angry tears, frustrated tears. Her hands were shaking as she clutched a stack of bills. "The mortgage is 3 months behind, Dad. 3 months. And the insurance company is asking questions about Mom's medical bills that I don't know how to answer. I've been handling everything since the funeral, and I can't do it anymore." I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I wanted to explain that the depression felt like drowning, that some days I couldn't even remember what I was supposed to be doing. But the words wouldn't come. They never came anymore. "I need you to sign these papers," she continued, spreading the documents across the coffee table. "We need to sell the house. I've been looking at smaller places, apartments maybe, something we can actually afford." The house. Martha and I had bought it when Clare was 3. It was a small Cape Cod-style home with a big backyard where Martha planted her garden and where Clare had her first birthday party outdoors. The kitchen still smelled like Martha's apple pie sometimes, early in the morning when the light hit just right. "I can't sell the house," I said quietly. "Why not?" Clare's voice was getting louder now. "Because of your precious memories. Dad, memories don't pay bills. Mom is gone. Gone. And you're acting like if you just sit in her chair long enough, she's going to come back." She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't right either. The house wasn't just about memories. It was the last place I'd felt like myself, the last place where I could still smell Martha's perfume faintly in the bedroom closet, still see the impression her head made on her pillow. "I'll get another job," I said, knowing it sounded weak even as I said it. "With what resume? You haven't updated your LinkedIn in years. You barely leave the house. When's the last time you showered, Dad? When's the last time you ate a real meal?" I couldn't answer because I honestly didn't know. Time had become this shapeless thing since Martha died. Days blended into nights, and I measured time by whether the mailman had come yet or if the newspaper was still on the front step. Clare knelt down in front of my chair, taking my hands in hers. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort between her parents. "I'm scared, Dad. I'm 27 years old, and I feel like I'm the parent now. I can't carry both of us. I need you to fight." I need you to want to get better. But I couldn't fight. The depression had wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, and even though I knew it was suffocating me, it also felt safe. It was easier than facing a world without Martha in it. I'm trying, I whispered, but we both knew it was a lie. Claire stood up, and something in her face changed. The hope I'd seen there moments before flickered and died. No, you're not. You're wallowing. Mom wouldn't want this, Dad. She'd want you to live, not just exist. Don't tell me what your mother would want, I snapped, surprising both of us with the sudden anger in my voice. You don't know what it's like to lose the person you plan to spend the rest of your life with. And you don't know what it's like to lose both parents at the same time, Claire shot back. Because that's what happened, Dad. I lost Mom to cancer, and I lost you to this selfishness. Selfishness. The word hit me like a physical blow. I stood up from the chair, my legs unsteady from sitting too long. How dare you call me selfish? I loved your mother, more than my own life. Then act like it, Claire screamed. Stop dishonoring her memory by giving up on everything she cared about, starting with yourself and ending with me. We stared at each other across that living room, 8 feet of space that might as well have been 8 miles. I could see Martha in Claire's face when she was angry, the same set to her jaw, the same fire in her eyes. But I could also see disappointment so deep it made my chest ache. I need $15,000, Claire said suddenly, her voice now coldly practical. That's what it'll take to catch up on the mortgage and buy us some time to figure out what comes next. $15,000. I didn't have $15,000. I barely had $15. I don't have it, I said simply. Then we lose the house. Then we lose the house. Claire stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something break inside her. It was subtle, like a crack in glass that starts small but spreads until the whole thing shatters. You are useless, she said, her voice quiet now, but somehow more devastating than if she'd screamed it. Mom spent 32 years taking care of you, protecting you, making excuses for you. And now that she's gone, you can't even function for 5 minutes without falling apart. She grabbed her purse from the kitchen counter and headed for the door. Claire, wait, I called after her. But my voice was weak and she didn't stop. I'm done, Dad. I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore, and I won't let you destroy me too. The front door slammed with a finality that seemed to echo through the empty house. I stood there in the sudden silence, listening to her car start and pull away. That was the last time I saw my daughter. The house did go into foreclosure 2 months later. I moved into a small apartment across town, taking only what fit in my beat-up Honda Civic. The rest, Martha's books, our photo albums, Claire's childhood drawings that Martha had saved, got sold or thrown away by strangers. For 8 years, I've lived with those words. You are useless. Some days I believe them. Some days they feel like the truest thing anyone has ever said to me. But today, everything changed, and I'm about to discover just how wrong Claire was about a lot of things. I was sitting in my small apartment kitchen, staring at a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy while I wasn't paying attention, when the doorbell rang. It was a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of gray day that makes you forget spring is supposed to be coming. I almost didn't answer. In 8 years of living in this place, unexpected visitors usually meant bad news. But the bell rang again, followed by a firm knock, so I shuffled to the door in my slippers and old bathrobe. Through the peephole, I saw a man in an expensive-looking suit, holding a briefcase. He looked like he'd stepped out of a law firm commercial. "Mr. Aaron Whitmore?" he asked when I opened the door. "Yes," I replied, immediately thinking about what bills I might have forgotten to pay. "My name is Robert Steinberg. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Martha Whitmore. May I come in?" Martha's estate. After 8 years, I'd almost forgotten that there might still be loose ends to tie up. The medical bills and funeral expenses had consumed what little savings we'd had, and I'd assumed that was the end of it. I led Mr. Steinberg to my small living room, suddenly conscious of how modest my apartment was compared to his tailored appearance. The furniture was second-hand, the carpet had stains I'd never been able to remove, and the whole place probably smelled like the takeout containers I sometimes forgot to throw away. "Mr. Whitmore," he began, setting his briefcase on my coffee table, "I apologize for the delay in contacting you. Martha's estate has been more complex than initially anticipated, and we've been working to resolve several financial matters. I nodded, not really understanding what he meant, but too embarrassed to ask. I have some news that I think will surprise you, he continued, pulling out a thick folder of documents. Did Martha ever mention to you that she had inherited money from her family? No, I said slowly. Martha had rarely talked about her family. Her parents had died when she was young, and she'd been raised by an aunt who passed away before we got married. As far as I knew, there wasn't much family money to speak of. Mr. Steinberg opened the folder and pulled out what looked like bank statements. Martha inherited a substantial sum from her great-uncle's estate about 12 years ago. She placed it in a private investment account and never touched it. He handed me a document, and I had to read the number 3 times before it made sense. The account balance showed $23,467,000. That's impossible, I whispered. I understand this is shocking, Mr. Steinberg said gently. But I have all the documentation here. The inheritance was legitimate, and Martha's investments were quite successful over the years. She left specific instructions that the money was not to be revealed until she had been deceased for at least 7 years. $23 million. I stared at the number until my eyes watered. All those years of struggling, of working overtime to pay Martha's medical bills, of losing the house because I couldn't scrape together $15,000. And this money had been sitting in an account somewhere. Why? I asked. Why didn't she tell me? Mr. Steinberg adjusted his glasses. According to her written instructions, she wanted to protect you and your daughter from the potential complications that substantial wealth can bring to family relationships. She'd seen it happen in her own extended family. I thought about Clare, about how she'd called me useless, about how she'd begged me for $15,000 to save our home. If I'd known about this money then, everything would have been different. She also left this for you, Mr. Steinberg said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Martha's familiar handwriting. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that was so typically Martha it made my chest tight with missing her. My dearest Aaron, it read, if you're reading this, then enough time has passed for you to have found your way through the worst of losing me. I know you, my love. I know you probably blamed yourself for not being able to afford better doctors or treatments, but money wouldn't have changed the outcome. What we had was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. This inheritance is my final gift to you, not just the money, but the chance to live without the weight of financial worry. Use it to build a new life, one that honors what we shared but doesn't remain trapped in the past. I love you always, Martha. I had to stop reading because I was crying too hard to see the words. Mr. Steinberg sat quietly, professionally ignoring my breakdown. There are some tax implications we'll need to discuss, he said eventually, and I'll need to help you set up proper financial management for an estate of this size. But the money is yours, Mr. Whitmore. All of it. After Mr. Steinberg left with promises to call in a few days to begin the transfer process, I sat alone in my apartment trying to process what had just happened. $23 million, more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. Enough money to buy 10 houses like the one Clare and I had lost. Enough money to change everything. But it was too late to change anything that mattered. I found myself thinking about Clare constantly over the next few days. Where was she now? Had she ever gotten married? Did she have children I'd never met? For 8 years I'd respected her wish to cut me out of her life, but now I found myself wondering if things could be different. The money changed practical things immediately. I paid off the small debts I'd accumulated, bought some new clothes that actually fit properly, and even got my car repaired. But the loneliness remained the same. Money, I discovered, couldn't fill the hole that missing your daughter creates in your life. I was beginning to think I'd have to live with that hole forever when, exactly 1 week after my meeting with Mr. Steinberg, my doorbell rang again. This time, when I looked through the peephole, my heart nearly stopped. Standing on my doorstep, holding what looked like a homemade cake, was Clare. She looked older, of course. Her dark hair was shorter now, styled in a way that made her look more professional. She was wearing a nice dress and had makeup on, something she'd rarely bothered with in her 20s, but her smile, the one she was giving to my peephole, looked forced and unfamiliar. I opened the door with hands that were suddenly sweating. "Dad," she said, and her voice was softer than I remembered. "I know this is unexpected, but I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I realized how much I miss you." She held up the cake, which was decorated with chocolate frosting and had "I'm sorry" written across the top in white icing. "I made this for you. For us, actually. I was hoping we could talk about reconciliation." Reconciliation. After 8 years of silence, 8 years of believing I'd lost my daughter forever, she was standing on my doorstep talking about reconciliation. "Claire," I managed to say, stepping aside to let her in. "I can't believe you're here." "I know," she said, setting the cake on my kitchen counter. "I know I hurt you when I left. I was young and angry and dealing with losing Mom in all the wrong ways. But I've been in therapy, Dad. I've learned a lot about grief and family dynamics and how people handle trauma differently." She turned to face me, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to help Martha bake cookies for the school fundraiser. "I'm 35 now," she continued. "I'm old enough to understand that you were hurting just as much as I was. Maybe more. I should have been more patient with you." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. For 8 years, I'd dreamed of this moment, of Claire coming back and telling me she forgave me, that we could be a family again. "I've missed you so much," I said, and it came out as barely a whisper. "I've missed you too, Dad, more than you know." She stepped closer and hugged me, and for a moment, it felt like time had reversed itself. She smelled like the same shampoo she'd used as a teenager, and her hair was just as soft as I remembered. But as we stood there in my small kitchen, something nagged at me. Something about her timing, about the way she kept glancing around my apartment like she was cataloging its contents, and something about her smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How did you find me?" I asked as we separated. "I hired a private investigator," she said quickly. "It took a while, but I've been looking for you for months now." Months. She'd been looking for months, and yet she'd chosen this exact week to show up. This week, just days after I'd learned about Martha's inheritance. "Let's sit down," she said, cutting into the cake she'd brought. "I want to hear everything about what you've been up to. I want to know all about your life now." But as I watched her serve the cake, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. And when she handed me my piece, her eyes were focused not on my face, but on something just over my shoulder. I turned to see what she was looking at, and realized her gaze had settled on the financial documents Mr. Steinberg had left with me, still spread across my coffee table. Documents that clearly showed the name of Martha's investment account and the balance of $23 million. My stomach dropped as the pieces began to fall into place. Claire's sudden appearance, her talk of reconciliation, her nervous energy, and, most tellingly, her knowledge of exactly where to find me. "This cake is delicious," I said carefully, taking a small bite. It was chocolate, Martha's favorite, but there was an odd aftertaste I couldn't identify. "Thanks," Claire said, not touching her own piece. "I made it from Mom's recipe. You know, the one she used for your birthdays." But that was wrong. Martha had never made me birthday cakes. She'd always bought them from the bakery downtown because she claimed she was terrible at decorating. It was a small detail, but one that Martha's daughter should have remembered correctly. As I sat there, looking at this woman who claimed to be my daughter seeking reconciliation, I began to wonder who Claire really was now, and what she really wanted from me. The cake was getting harder to swallow, and I was starting to feel strangely tired. The strange drowsiness hit me about 20 minutes after I'd finished the cake. It started as a gentle fog around the edges of my thoughts, but gradually became harder to ignore. Claire was still talking, something about how sorry she was for all the years we'd lost, but her voice seemed to be coming from farther and farther away. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that didn't sound quite right. Not concern exactly, more like anticipation. "I'm just tired," I mumbled, trying to focus on her face. "Haven't been sleeping well lately." "Maybe you should lie down for a bit," she suggested. "I can stay here and clean up the kitchen. We have all the time in the world to catch up." All the time in the world. The phrase stuck in my mind as I excused myself to splash cold water on my face in the bathroom. Standing at the sink, gripping the porcelain edges to steady myself, I tried to think through the fog that was settling over my brain. Something was wrong. Beyond the obvious strangeness of Claire's sudden reappearance, there were details that didn't add up. The cake recipe she'd gotten wrong, her nervousness, the way she'd looked at those financial documents, and now this overwhelming tiredness that had come on so suddenly after eating. I forced myself to focus, to push through whatever was making me feel so sluggish. Through the bathroom door, I could hear Clare moving around my apartment, not cleaning the kitchen like she'd said. I could hear her opening drawers, rifling through papers. Quietly, I opened the bathroom door just a crack and peered out. Clare was at my coffee table, photographing the financial documents with her phone. She worked quickly and efficiently, like someone who'd done this before. When she finished with those, she moved to the small desk where I kept my personal files and began going through them systematically. I watched her for several minutes, my heart sinking with each drawer she opened. This wasn't my daughter seeking reconciliation. This was someone conducting a careful search of my belongings, looking for something specific. The medication in the cake was making it hard to think clearly, but I knew I had to act before it got worse. I needed to understand what was happening, and I needed evidence of what Clare was doing. Pretending to stumble slightly, I made noise coming out of the bathroom. "Clare," I called out, giving her time to return to the kitchen. "Right here, Dad," she answered. And when I entered the living room, she was back at the kitchen counter, innocently wrapping up the remaining cake. "Feeling any better?" "A little," I lied. "Actually, I'm thinking I might take a short nap. Would you mind if we continued our visit later?" Her face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course not." "But Dad, before you rest, I was wondering if we could talk about some practical things. You know, about your finances and your future plans." There it was, the real reason for her visit. "My finances?" I asked, settling carefully into my recliner. "What about them?" "Well, I know you've been struggling since you lost your job, and at your age, it must be hard to think about retirement without much saved up." She sat down across from me, leaning forward with what she probably thought looked like genuine concern. "I've been doing well for myself over the years. I'd like to help you, if you'll let me." "Help me?" I almost laughed, but the medication was making everything feel surreal and distant. "That's very generous of you," I said slowly, "but I'm actually doing okay financially these days." "Oh?" Her interest sharpened immediately. "Did you find a new job?" "Not exactly." I watched her face carefully as I spoke. "It turns out your mother left me some money I didn't know about." Claire's eyes widened, but something about her expression seemed practiced, rehearsed. "Mom left you money? How much?" "Quite a bit, actually, enough that I don't have to worry about the future anymore." "That's wonderful, Dad." She stood up suddenly, moving toward the coffee table where the documents had been. It must be such a relief after all these years of struggling. "Can I ask how much? Just so I know you're really going to be secure." I could see her calculating behind her eyes, trying to figure out if I'd noticed her earlier snooping. $23 million, I said quietly. The mask slipped for just a moment. I saw naked greed flash across her face before she caught herself and rearranged her features back into an expression of surprise. $23 million? She repeated, her voice slightly breathless. "Dad, that's incredible. You're rich." "I suppose I am." "We need to make sure you're managing it properly," she said, moving closer to my chair. "Money like that, it can be overwhelming. You'll need financial advisors, investment strategies, proper legal protection. I could help you with that. I've learned a lot about financial planning over the years." The drowsiness was getting stronger, but I forced myself to stay alert. "What kind of work do you do now, Claire? You never mentioned your career." "Oh, various things. Consulting, mostly. Financial consulting." She waved her hand dismissively. "The important thing is that you don't get taken advantage of. There are so many people who prey on elderly individuals who come into sudden wealth. Elderly individuals. Not people like you or men your age. Elderly individuals." The phrase was clinical, detached, the way someone might refer to a mark, not a father. "I'm only 59, I pointed out. Of course. I just mean that you've been through so much trauma with losing Mom and dealing with depression. It might be hard to make sound financial decisions while you're still processing everything." "Still processing everything?" after 8 years. "Claire," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "how exactly did you find me?" "I told you. I hired a private investigator." "And when did you start looking for me?" "A few months ago." "What made you decide to look for me after all these years?" She hesitated for just a moment too long. "I've been in therapy, like I said. My therapist helped me realize how much I missed having you in my life." "What's your therapist's name?" Another pause. "Dr. Richardson. Dr. Sarah Richardson." I nodded as if this made perfect sense, but I was filing away every detail. Something told me that Dr. Sarah Richardson, if she existed at all, would be as fictional as the version of Clare sitting across from me. The medication was making it increasingly difficult to think straight, but I knew I couldn't let myself fall asleep. Not with Clare here, not with her having access to my apartment and my financial information. "I think I will take that nap now," I said, standing up carefully. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. I'll just clean up and maybe watch some TV." I made my way to the bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see Clare immediately return to searching my apartment. This time, she was looking for something specific, checking behind picture frames, looking under furniture cushions, even examining the backs of my few decorative items. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. After about an hour, I heard her make a phone call. "It's me," she said quietly. "I'm in, but I haven't found what we need yet. The old man is loaded, though. 23 million. We were right about the inheritance." A pause while she listened to whoever was on the other end. "No, he's not as out of it as we thought he'd be. The medication worked, but he's still asking questions. We might need to move to Plan B sooner than expected." Plan B. My blood ran cold despite the fog in my head. "Tomorrow night should work. Can you get the paperwork ready by then?" "Good. And remember, it has to look legitimate. We can't afford any loose ends this time." She hung up, and I heard her moving around the apartment again. After another 30 minutes, she knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Dad? I'm going to head out now, but I'll be back tomorrow. We can spend the whole day together and really catch up properly." "Okay," I called back, making my voice sound sleepy and confused. "Sweet dreams, Dad. I love you." The apartment door closed with a soft click, and I was alone again. But now, instead of the familiar loneliness I'd grown accustomed to, I felt something much worse. The terrible knowledge that my own daughter was planning to rob me, and possibly worse than that. I lay in bed for another hour waiting for the medication to wear off enough that I could think clearly. When I finally felt steady enough to move around, I began my own search of the apartment. I found a small recording device tucked behind my kitchen clock and another one hidden in the lamp beside my reading chair. Clare hadn't just been photographing my documents. She'd been monitoring my conversations, probably for weeks. I thought about the private investigator she'd mentioned, about how she'd found me so easily, about her phone call and the mysterious Plan B that was supposed to happen tomorrow night, about the way she'd looked at those financial documents like she was appraising valuable assets. Sitting in my living room at 3 o'clock in the morning, I faced a truth I'd been avoiding since she'd walked through my door. The little girl who used to help her mother bake cookies was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw me not as her father, but as a target. And tomorrow night, she was coming back to finish whatever she'd started. I had less than 24 hours to figure out what Plan B meant, and to decide what I was going to do about the daughter who was no longer my daughter at all. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I spent the early morning hours carefully examining every inch of my apartment, looking for more recording devices, and trying to piece together exactly what Clare had been doing. In the kitchen trash, hidden beneath coffee grounds and food scraps, I found something that made my blood run cold. An empty prescription bottle. The label had been torn off, but I could still make out part of the pharmacy sticker and a few letters of what looked like a medication name. Enough to know it wasn't anything I'd been prescribed. I wrapped it in a paper towel and put it in my pocket. Evidence, though. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it. By 7 in the morning, I was dressed and sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, trying to organize what I knew. Clare had appeared exactly 1 week after I'd learned about the inheritance. She'd hired a private investigator to find me, but claimed she'd been searching for months. She'd drugged me with some kind of sedative hidden in homemade cake. She'd searched my apartment and photographed my financial documents. She'd planted listening devices to monitor my conversations, and she was coming back tonight with something called Plan B. The more I thought about it, the more questions arose. How had she known about the inheritance in the first place? The lawyer had said Martha's instructions were that the money remained secret for 7 years, and that no one else had been informed about it. Yet Clare had somehow known to start looking for me right around the time it would be revealed. I needed answers, and I needed them before she returned. I called Mr. Steinberg's office as soon as it opened at 9 o'clock. His secretary tried to schedule me for later in the week, but I insisted it was urgent. Something about my tone must have convinced her because she put me through directly. "Mr. Whitmore," Mr. Steinberg said when he picked up the phone, "how can I help you?" "I need to know who else might have had access to information about Martha's inheritance," I said without preamble. "Someone besides you and me." There was a pause. "That's an unusual question. May I ask why you're concerned about this?" I explained about Clare's sudden reappearance and the timing of her visit. I didn't mention the drugging or the surveillance equipment. I wasn't ready to accuse my daughter of criminal activity to a lawyer I barely knew, but I told him enough that he understood my concerns. "I see," he said when I finished. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Has anyone pressured you to make changes to your estate planning or asked you to sign any financial documents since we last spoke?" "Not yet," I said, "but I have reason to believe someone might try." "In that case, I think you should know that your daughter contacted our office 3 weeks ago." My hand tightened around the phone. "What?" "She called, claiming to be concerned about your mental health. She said she'd heard from family friends that you might be suffering from dementia or depression that could affect your judgment. She wanted to know if there were any legal mechanisms in place to protect you from making poor financial decisions." 3 weeks ago, before she'd even made contact with me. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing, of course. Even if she is your daughter, attorney-client privilege prevents me from discussing your affairs with anyone without your explicit consent. But, Mr. Whitmore, the fact that she was asking these questions before she'd even spoken to you suggests she already knew about the inheritance. How is that possible?" "I'm not sure. Martha's instructions were very clear, and we've been careful to follow them to the letter. But there are other ways information like this might have surfaced. Insurance records, tax documents, estate filing requirements. If someone was determined enough and had the right connections, or if they hired the right kind of private investigator," I finished. "Exactly. Mr. Whitmore, I think you should consider taking some precautions. People have done terrible things for far less money than you've inherited." After I hung up, I sat staring at my legal pad, adding this new information to what I already knew. Clare had been researching my finances and mental state for weeks before making contact. She'd been planning this approach for much longer than she'd admitted, but I still didn't know what her endgame was. The phone call I'd overheard mentioned paperwork and something that had to look legitimate. It sounded like fraud, but what kind? I decided to do some investigating of my own. If Clare could hire a private investigator, so could I. I found a local firm online and called their office. The woman who answered was professional, but direct. When I explained that I needed background information on someone claiming to be my estranged daughter, she didn't ask questions beyond what was necessary for the job. "I can have preliminary information for you by this afternoon," she told me. "Full background report by tomorrow morning, but if this is urgent, you might want to consider involving the police." "Not yet," I said. "I need to be sure about what I'm dealing with first." She gave me her direct number and told me to call if anything escalated before she could complete her research. The rest of the morning dragged by slowly. I found myself checking the locks on my apartment door repeatedly and looking out the windows to see if anyone was watching the building. The listening devices Clare had planted were still in place. I decided to leave them there until I knew more about what she was planning. At 2 o'clock, my phone rang. The private investigator had preliminary information for me. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I think you should sit down for this." I was already sitting, but I gripped the phone tighter. "The woman who contacted you yesterday is indeed your daughter, Clare Whitmore. That part is legitimate. But her financial situation is much worse than she probably let on. She filed for bankruptcy 18 months ago. Before that, she was involved in at least 2 civil lawsuits related to investment fraud. She's been working with a man named Danny Reeves, who has a criminal record for elder fraud and identity theft. Elder fraud. The phrase hit me like a punch to the stomach. There's more, she continued. I found records of similar schemes in 3 other states over the past 5 years. The pattern is always the same. They target elderly individuals who've recently come into money, usually through inheritance or insurance payouts. One family member makes contact claiming reconciliation. Then they work together to either gain power of attorney or convince the victim to invest their money in fake opportunities. What happened to the other victims? In 2 cases, the victims lost everything and were left in debt. In the 3rd case, she paused, the victim died under suspicious circumstances and the money disappeared. The case was never solved. My hands were shaking as I wrote down the information she gave me. Danny Reeves, elder fraud, suspicious circumstances. I'm sending you everything I've found so far by email, she said. But Mr. Whitmore, if this woman is planning to return tonight, I strongly recommend you contact the police immediately. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment trying to process what I'd learned. My daughter, my real daughter, not some imposter, had become someone who preyed on elderly people for money. She'd spent years perfecting techniques for robbing people like me, and now she was using those skills on her own father. The little girl who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms had grown up to be someone who might kill for money. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my daughter had visited me and brought me cake? That she'd searched my apartment? I had the recording devices as evidence. But would that be enough to convince anyone she was dangerous? And if I was wrong, if there was some other explanation for everything I'd learned, I would be destroying any chance of a real relationship with Claire forever. No. I needed to know for certain what she was planning before I involved the authorities. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. I spent the afternoon preparing. I found my old digital recorder, the one I'd used for work meetings years ago, and made sure it was working. I charged my phone and made sure it was set to auto-record calls. I even wrote out a summary of everything I'd learned and sealed it in an envelope, which I hid in a place Claire wouldn't think to look. If something happened to me, at least there would be a record of what had led up to it. As evening approached, I found myself thinking about Martha, about the letter she'd left with the inheritance, telling me to use the money to build a new life. She'd wanted to protect me from the complications that wealth could bring to family relationships, but she'd never imagined it might put my life in danger. Or maybe she had. Maybe that's why she'd waited 7 years to reveal it, hoping that by then, anyone who might want to exploit me would have moved on. At exactly 6 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Claire standing there with another homemade cake, and that same forced smile I was beginning to recognize. But this time, I also noticed the man standing just out of sight around the corner of the hallway. Tall, thin, with dark hair and the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was ready to move fast if necessary. Danny Reeves, I presumed. I took a deep breath, turned on my digital recorder, and opened the door. "Hi, Dad," Claire said brightly. "I brought dessert again. I hope you're feeling better today." "Much better," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Actually, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday, and I have some ideas about how we might move forward." "That's wonderful." She set the cake on my kitchen counter, and I noticed her hands were steadier today, more confident. "I was hoping you'd say that. In fact, I brought someone I'd like you to meet." She walked back to the door and called down the hallway. "Danny, could you come in here, please?" The man I'd seen in the hallway stepped into my apartment, and I got my first close look at Danny Reeves. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of smooth, practiced charm that probably worked well on lonely elderly people. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, extending his hand. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. Claire has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied, shaking his hand while the recorder in my pocket captured every word. "Oh, absolutely. She's been so worried about you over the years, so excited to reconnect." His smile was perfect, professionally warm. I'm actually here in a professional capacity. I'm a financial advisor, and Claire thought I might be able to help you navigate some of the complex decisions you're facing with your inheritance. That's very thoughtful of her, I said, looking at Claire. Her eyes were bright with anticipation, and I realized she thought she'd already won. Shall we sit down and talk about your future? Danny suggested, pulling out a briefcase I hadn't noticed he'd been carrying. As we settled into my living room, I caught Claire checking her watch. Whatever they had planned, it was scheduled for a specific time, and based on everything I'd learned about their previous victims, I was running out of time to discover what that plan actually was. Danny opened his briefcase with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Inside were stacks of official-looking documents, business cards, and what appeared to be legitimate financial planning materials. But I'd learned enough in the past 24 hours to know that appearances could be deceiving. "Mr. Whitmore," Danny began, spreading papers across my coffee table, $23 million is a substantial inheritance. Without proper planning, you could lose a significant portion to taxes, poor investments, or simply the challenges of managing such wealth at your stage of life. At my stage of life. Another clinical phrase designed to make me feel vulnerable and dependent. That's why Claire asked me to put together a comprehensive wealth management strategy for you, he continued. Something that will protect your assets while ensuring you have access to the income you need for a comfortable retirement. Claire leaned forward, her hand touching my arm in a gesture that might have seemed loving to an observer. "I've been so worried about you handling all this alone, Dad. Danny specializes in helping people in situations exactly like yours." "What kind of situations are those?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear how they would frame their pitch. "Elderly individuals who've come into sudden wealth," Danny replied without missing a beat. "It's more common than you might think, and unfortunately, it often makes people targets for scams and exploitation." The irony was staggering. He was warning me about the very thing he was doing to me. "The key," he continued, "is to move quickly while keeping everything completely legitimate and above board. We'll set up a series of trusts and investment accounts that will protect your money while giving you steady income. Claire will be designated as your financial power of attorney, which will allow her to help manage your affairs as you get older." Power of attorney. There it was, the mechanism they plan to use to gain control of my money. "That sounds complicated," I said carefully. "Don't I need to think about something like that? Maybe consult with my own lawyer?" Claire's grip on my arm tightened slightly. "Of course you could do that, Dad. But lawyers charge hundreds of dollars an hour, and they'll drag the process out for months. Danny's offering to handle everything for a fraction of what you'd pay a law firm. Plus," Danny added, "time is really a factor here. The IRS has specific deadlines for inheritance tax planning, and if we miss them, you could end up owing millions more than necessary." This was a lie. Mr. Steinberg had already explained the tax implications to me, and there were no urgent deadlines that would require immediate action. But to someone who didn't understand tax law, it would sound frighteningly convincing. "I have some forms here that will get us started," Danny said, pulling out a thick stack of documents. "Nothing binding, just preliminary paperwork that allows me to begin working on your behalf." I glanced at the papers. Even upside down, I could see that they included power of attorney forms, bank account transfer authorizations, and what looked like investment agreements. Everything they would need to gain complete control of my inheritance. "Before we do anything," I said, "I'd like to understand more about your background, Danny. Where did you go to school? What firm do you work for?" His smile flickered for just a moment. "I run my own practice. Independent financial advisors often provide more personalized service than the big corporate firms." "And your credentials?" "I'm certified by several industry organizations. I can get you copies of my certifications if you'd like." Claire jumped in quickly. "Dad, I've already verified Danny's background. I wouldn't have brought him to you if I wasn't completely confident in his expertise." Of course she had verified his background. She probably knew exactly how many people he'd defrauded and how much money they'd stolen together. "I'm sure you have," I said, "but $23 million is a lot of money. I'd be foolish not to be cautious." "Caution is good," Danny agreed. But paralysis by analysis can be just as dangerous as rushing into bad decisions. Sometimes the biggest risk is waiting too long to act. He was good, I had to admit. His arguments sounded reasonable, and if I'd been the confused, vulnerable elderly man they thought I was, I might have been convinced. "Why don't we start with something small?" Claire suggested. "Maybe just a few $100,000 to begin with. Once you see how well Danny manages that, you can decide about the rest." A few $100,000, as if that were pocket change. As if losing that amount would be acceptable as long as the rest of my inheritance remained safe. "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about something else entirely." Both of them looked at me with sudden attention. "I've been alone for 8 years now," I continued. 8 years of believing I'd lost my daughter forever. "Having you back in my life, Claire, it's made me realize what's really important." Claire's expression softened, and for a moment she looked almost genuine. "Dad, I don't need $23 million, I said. I need family. I need to know that the people I love will be taken care of." Danny's eyes lit up with greed, poorly disguised as professional interest. "What I'm thinking," I continued, "is maybe we should just simplify everything. Transfer the entire inheritance directly to you, Claire. That way, I don't have to worry about managing it, and you'll be secure for the rest of your life." The room went completely silent. Claire and Danny exchanged a look that confirmed everything I'd suspected about their relationship and their plans. "Dad," Claire said slowly, "that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't accept that much money. It's your inheritance." But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes said she was calculating exactly how quickly she could make that transfer happen. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Whitmore?" Danny asked. "It's a significant decision. Maybe we should start with the trust arrangements I mentioned, just to make sure you have some protection." "No," I said firmly. "I've made up my mind. I want everything to go to Claire. Tonight, if possible." Claire was trying to contain her excitement, but I could see it in the way she was sitting forward, in the flush that had appeared on her cheeks. This was going even better than she'd hoped. "I have the forms right here," Danny said, shuffling through his papers with barely controlled eagerness. "If you're absolutely certain, we can take care of this immediately." "I'm certain," I said. Then I looked directly at Claire. "But first, I need you to answer one question honestly." "Of course, Dad. Anything? Do you love me?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing without sound for a moment. "Of course I love you," she said finally. "You're my father." "Then why did you drug me yesterday?" The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Claire's face went pale, and Danny's hand moved instinctively toward his briefcase. "What are you talking about?" Claire asked, but her voice had lost its warmth. I pulled the empty prescription bottle from my pocket and set it on the coffee table next to Danny's documents. "I found this in my kitchen trash after you left yesterday, along with the listening devices you planted behind my clock and in my lamp." Danny started to stand up, but I held up my hand. "I wouldn't if I were you. I've been recording this entire conversation, and I've already contacted the authorities about your previous victims in 3 other states." Claire's mask finally slipped completely. The loving, apologetic daughter disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You stupid old man," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me? I've been planning this for months." "Actually, it's been longer than that," I replied. "You've been monitoring my finances for at least 3 weeks. You knew about the inheritance before you made contact with me." Danny was looking toward the door, clearly considering whether he could make it out of my apartment before I could stop him. "The police are already on their way," I lied smoothly. "I called them before you arrived. They should be here any minute." That was enough for Danny. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door, leaving Claire to face the consequences alone. "Danny!" she called after him, but he was already gone. Claire turned back to me, and I saw something in her face that I'd never seen before. Hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. "You think you're so smart," she said, "but you're still the same pathetic failure you were 8 years ago. Mom died knowing you were worthless, and now you're going to die alone with all your precious money and no one who gives a damn about you." The word should have hurt. For 8 years, I'd carried the guilt of believing I'd failed as a father, that I'd driven away the only family I had left. But looking at this woman who shared my DNA but had no love in her heart, I felt something I hadn't experienced in nearly a decade. Relief. "You know what, Claire?" I said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I am going to die alone. But I'd rather die alone with my self-respect than live surrounded by people who only see me as a source of money." She stared at me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with rapid, angry breaths. "This isn't over," she said finally. "I'll find another way." "No," I replied, "you won't, because after tonight, you'll never see me or my money again." Claire grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "I hope you rot in hell, old man." "I probably will," I admitted, "but at least I'll rot there with my dignity intact." After she left, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, listening to the silence that had been my companion for 8 years. But this time, the silence felt different. It felt peaceful. For the first time since Martha died, I wasn't waiting for someone to come back and tell me I was worth loving. I'd learned something infinitely more valuable. I was worth protecting, even from my own daughter. 3 months have passed since that night, and I'm sitting in the same chair where I confronted Claire. But everything else in my life has changed. The recording I made of our conversation, combined with the evidence the private investigator had gathered, was enough for the police to issue warrants for both Claire and Danny Reeves. They were arrested 2 weeks later, trying to run the same scam on a 73-year-old widower in Phoenix. I didn't attend Claire's trial. Mr. Steinberg advised against it, and honestly, I had no desire to see her again. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for elder fraud and conspiracy. Danny got 7 years, thanks to his longer criminal history. The prosecutor told me that my case helped them connect Claire and Danny to at least 4 other victims across 3 states. Recovery of stolen funds that might never have happened without my testimony. But that's not the story I really want to tell you about. The story I want to tell you is about what happened after I stopped trying to be the father Claire wanted me to be and started trying to be the man Martha had believed I could become. The first thing I did was move out of that little apartment, not into a mansion or anything ostentatious, but into a comfortable 2-bedroom house with a small garden. I'd forgotten how much I missed having space to breathe, windows that let in natural light and dirt under my fingernails from planting things that would grow. Martha would have loved the garden. I planted roses like the ones she used to tend, and every morning when I water them, I tell her about my day. It sounds crazy maybe, but talking to her makes me feel less alone without making me feel pathetic, the way those 8 years of silence had. I also did something I never would have imagined. I started volunteering at a senior center downtown. Not because I felt obligated to be charitable with my inheritance, but because I wanted to be around people again. Real people, not people who saw dollar signs when they looked at me. That's where I met Eleanor. Eleanor is 72 years old, volunteers in the center's library, and has absolutely no idea how much money I have. To her, I'm just Aaron, the guy who comes in 3 times a week to help teach computer skills to other seniors. She knows I lost my wife 8 years ago, and she knows I had a difficult relationship with my daughter, but she doesn't know the details of either situation. What she does know is that I make her laugh, and I know that she makes me want to be a better version of myself. We've been having coffee together every Thursday for 2 months now. Nothing romantic, nothing pressured. Just 2 people who've lived long enough to appreciate genuine companionship when they find it. Eleanor tells me about her grandchildren, about the mystery novels she loves, about her late husband, who was a high school principal for 40 years. I tell her about Martha, about my work life before everything fell apart, about the small victories and defeats that make up a normal human existence. Yesterday, she brought me a book she thought I'd enjoy. It was a memoir about a man who rebuilt his life after losing everything in his 50s. She'd written a note on the inside cover that said, "For Aaron, who shows me every week that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to start over." 8 years ago, when Claire called me useless and walked out of my life, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd failed at everything that mattered, but I was measuring my worth by the wrong standards. I was letting other people define what my life should look like, instead of deciding for myself what kind of man I wanted to be. The money from Martha's inheritance sits mostly untouched in investment accounts managed by a legitimate financial advisor Mr. Steinberg recommended. I live comfortably but not extravagantly. I drive a reliable car, eat at decent restaurants, buy books without checking the price. But the real wealth isn't in my bank account. It's in the fact that I wake up each morning with a sense of purpose. I've started writing, something I used to do years ago before life got so complicated. Just stories, memories, observations about getting older and wiser in a world that often seems designed to make you feel obsolete. I don't know if I'll ever publish anything, but writing gives me a way to make sense of everything I've experienced. Last week, I got a letter forwarded through Mr. Steinberg's office. It was from Clare, written from prison. She wanted me to know that she was sorry, that she'd been desperate and made terrible choices, that she hoped someday we could reconcile. She said prison had given her time to think about what she'd lost when she chose money over family. I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer with all the other letters she sent over the past 3 months. I'm not ready to forgive her, and I may never be. But I'm also not carrying anger toward her anymore. She's made her choices, and she'll have to live with the consequences. I've made mine. And for the first time in 8 years, I'm proud of the man those choices have made me. The truth is, Claire was right about one thing. I am going to die alone, in the sense that I don't have a traditional family waiting to gather around my deathbed and grieve my passing. But she was wrong about everything else. I'm not dying unloved. Eleanor cares about me, and I care about her. The other volunteers at the senior center look forward to seeing me, and I look forward to seeing them. Mrs. Patterson next door brings me vegetables from her garden and stays to chat about her late husband's war stories. These relationships aren't bound by blood or legal obligation. They're bound by choice, by mutual respect, by the simple human need to connect with others. I'm not dying worthless. The computer classes I teach have helped dozens of seniors stay connected with distant grandchildren through email and video calls. The small donations I make to local charities help fund programs that make real differences in people's lives. The stories I write might never be bestsellers, but they'll exist as a record of one man's attempt to find meaning after loss. And I'm not dying bitter. For years after Martha's death, I was angry at everyone, at God for taking her too soon, at the doctors who couldn't save her, at Clare for abandoning me, at myself for failing to be stronger. But anger is exhausting, and I'm too old to carry that weight anymore. What I've learned is that family isn't about who shares your DNA or who shows up when times are good. Family is about who stands by you when things get difficult, who sees your flaws and loves you anyway, who celebrates your victories without jealousy, and comforts your defeats without judgment. By that definition, I have more family now than I've had in years. Tomorrow is Thursday, which means coffee with Eleanor. She's going to tell me about the mystery novel she finished this week, and I'm going to tell her about the roses that are finally starting to bloom in my garden. We'll probably end up talking for 2 hours about everything and nothing, the way people do when they genuinely enjoy each other's company. After that, I'll go home to my quiet house, water Martha's roses, and maybe write a few pages about what it feels like to be 59 years old and finally learning how to live for myself. Not for my daughter's approval, not for anyone else's expectations, but for the simple pleasure of being a decent human being in a complicated world. Claire taught me something valuable, though I don't think she meant to. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who hurt you most. But she also taught me something even more important. You don't have to let other people's failures define your own worth. I may be alone in some ways, but I'm not lonely anymore. I may not have the family I once thought I wanted, but I have something better. The peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being proud of that person. Martha's letter said the inheritance was meant to give me the chance to build a new life, one that honored what we'd shared but didn't remain trapped in the past. I think I've finally figured out how to do that. Some evenings when I'm sitting in my garden watching the sun set behind the roses Martha would have loved, I can almost hear her voice telling me she's proud of the man I've become. And for the first time since she died, I think I'm proud of him too. That's worth more than $23 million. That's worth more than all the money in the world.